With each URL, there are a number of properties that we can examine. You can find them here inside the property view. There are a few that are important to note. Cache control determines whether this request can be cached. Encoding is simply the character encoding used for this request. The expected HTTP status code can be set, so if you expect it to be a 404, you can specify that, or if for some reason you expected there to be an error code, you could set that as well. If you leave this value at 0, it means the default browsing behavior will be used, which means that any 200 or 300 will indicate a success, but a 400 or 500 level code will indicate a failure. You can specify the expected response URL. This is the URL that you should see after the request comes back. A blank value means that you don't expect any particular URL, but if you enter one and it's different, then that will cause the test to fail. You can specify whether or not redirect should be followed. You can specify the HTTP verb to use, which by default will be get, unless you're doing a form post, in which case it will be a post. You can specify, whether or not to parse dependent requests or whether to record the results. You can specify a custom reporting name, which will be displayed when the test is shown in the various windows. By default, the URL is what you will see. However, if you want to give it a custom name, especially if you have the same URL being used multiple times within a workflow, it can be helpful for you to specify a custom name here in the reporting name. If I say this is the home page, then under our reports we'll start to see this as the home page when it's displayed. Response time is the goal in seconds that the page should respond in. Think time is how many seconds should be used prior to this request being made. You can turn on think time globally as part of a load test. You can specify a timeout which defaults to 300 seconds. This simply indicates the maximum amount of time that the request can take to execute. Finally, you can customize the URL, including the domain and path as well as port. You can also specify the version, which in this case corresponds to the HTTP version to be used. If you categorize the properties, you'll see that the transport category includes both the method as well as the version. Looking back at the parse dependent request property, this is one that's interesting because when you are executing your test, it will include all of the dependent files such as style sheets, images, and script files when this is set to true. This is the real-world scenario that your application will undergo, and if you want to verify that all of those files exist and are loaded properly, then you will want to leave this at the default value of true. However, sometimes you may wish to only test the server performance of your application and how quickly the ASP.NET, for example, is able to process the information being submitted to it and returned. In that case, static files such as the script, image, style sheets will not be as interesting to you for your request, and so you might wish to turn this value to false when doing that sort of a scenario.